I'm Will Hedrick.
And I'm Jordan Schaffer.
And this is Dog Ears and Timestamps, a book club podcast.
Books are getting spooky.
Yeah. We were already talking about this a little bit, but this book is fucking with me, man.
Yeah.
And to that point, like we had talked about in previous episodes about like horror and stuff like that, how I'm not really into horror stuff, I don't like horror stuff. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Is that it's just fucking with me, and this is not something that I typically partake in. I had to lock my bedroom door last night when I went to sleep after finishing it. I was like, nothing's going to happen, but this will make it like 5% easier to fall asleep.
Yeah,
so I'm going to do it.
Any little bit to help. Dude, that's funny. I always forget you read at night too. I usually do most of my listening during the day. I was taking notes during the day too today, so like even re-listening, I'll throw myself super in the scene and I'll like spook myself out with some of the stuff that he says. He's got good imagery, I think.
Yeah, he really paints a perfect picture of just dread. Because whenever something is going to happen, it just feels awful.
Dude, I feel like as a writer, you got to take yourself into these like places. Some of the stuff, being a writer and his main character in this book being a writer, I think some of it he can relate to. And then also, you have to like sit there and write for like 8 hours a day. I just, for whatever reason, I thought of writing as kind of like doing a paper for school. How I would just sit down and zone out for an hour or two as I wrote my paper. And then it was weird because I'd always zone out as I was writing, and I'd kind of like come to and the paper would be done. But it was only like a couple hours that I ever spent, and then I was done. I didn't do too much editing and proofreading and all that. But it seems like as a writer, if you're cranking out, well, Ben Mears is cranking out 10 pages a day and drinking beer or whatever. So like if you're cranking out 10 pages a day, that sounds really hard after the first day. I could maybe do it once, but not.
Well, it's
not
also
the second
like
or third day.
It being their job.
That's true.
And that's something that I remind myself whenever I think of anything that's not an ordinary job, whether it's writing or when I think about like athletes. And like, man, how do they have the time to do all that fitness? I was like, well, that's all they do. Their day at work is going and, staying in shape and practicing and stuff like that. Ben's job is spending all day writing, where I've spent 9 hours at my job. Yeah. He spends 9 hours or whatever doing his job. He just wakes up, eats something, starts writing, and then whatever,
lets his day happen.
Right. It seems enviable to some degree, but I also don't know how to ever really write anything like that, to be able to write that much. Yeah. That seems like something that, I wouldn't even know where to start with that. So it's probably not nearly as enviable as I think. Yeah. I really put it off this time. I didn't read until yesterday. Nice. And then
yesterday
I went through
Saturday.
Yeah, and then went through again today for notes while I was watching football.
Nice.
Still watching football.
Yeah. Dude, football takes over. But I typically, for the weeks as we've been doing them, I try to read after like Wednesday, or on Wednesday, like I'm one of the listeners, right? And I try to start reading, and then whenever we're off schedule for our recordings, which not that this is off schedule, but it ends up making me feel like I'm cramming a little bit, but I really wasn't, because I re-listened to the whole thing again. So this last week on a Thursday, I think I listened to everything that we had already read, and then a little bit of new stuff, and then I had listened to only new stuff on Friday, and then I listened to all of it again Saturday, and while I was at work, and then today I made for notes today, and then I just kept getting distracted, and notes took like all day. I started at like 11, and I wasn't done till like 5. It just took all day.
It definitely took me all day too. Which is 100% my fault, because I was watching football the whole time. I woke up, and I was hoping that I could wake up a little bit earlier and try to knock out at least half of them before football started, because football starts at noon. I woke up like at a decent time. I woke up like at 7:30.
Oh, nice.
And I was like, oh man, this is like so much earlier than I need to be awake, because I went to sleep like at 3 o'clock last night.
Not as nice.
No, I'm going to go back to sleep. I'm going to sleep until like 9:30, and then I'll be good. But I never set any alarms, because it was just whatever. It was the weekend, I didn't care. And so I woke up like at 9:45, and I was like, all right, sweet, this is perfect. I'm going to go ahead and like lay here in bed, read some stuff on my phone, and then I'm going to get up and get started for the day. And then all of a sudden, it was like 11:30. Yeah, I was like, fuck, man, this happens. And it happens every fucking time.
It's that phone, man, just getting...
No, I just fell back asleep.
Oh, okay,
that's my
nice.
problem.
Okay, so I was going to say...
I'll like check a couple things on my phone. It takes me like 5 minutes to catch up on what I want to catch up on, and then I fall back asleep.
I was going to say, even though I'm like off social media, like I'll still get lost on my phone sometimes. Just clicking on our Twitter for the thing, like I'll get lost in the Twitter. Like when I was in Mexico, I found this video of this kid that was like... Some people ask me if I I even skate? And then he flips his ice cream cone and catches it, and then he licks it. And he's like, do you even skate? It's the stupidest video, but that kid is so funny. Dude, I died. I watched it like 20 times.
That's really funny.
It was hilarious. He wasn't even looking at the cone. He just flips it, catches it.
It doesn't even have anything to do with skating.
No, it doesn't.
It's so fucking good.
It was hilarious, man. And I was just like, man, the internet is awesome. Like, social media is so much fun. Like, I need to get off again. Like,
right.
Just even tapping into it a little bit is fun.
It's too much. I waste a decent amount of time on Instagram. That's the only one that I have on my phone still, because it's just pictures. I mean, the reason that I got off of Twitter was because I was complaining about too much and I was being too open on Twitter, and I was just a nasty person. I didn't like it.
Okay.
And then the reason that I still have Facebook, because that's the only way I can keep in contact with some people. Yeah. You know, like that's the only avenue that I have of knowing anything that's going on with them, and even just like messaging them. But I don't have it on my phone.
Okay, that's fine.
I just access it on my computer. But I stopped having that on my phone because everybody else pisses me off on Facebook. It's like the opposite of what I'm like. I imagine I'm just making everybody angry on Twitter. Yeah. Everybody's making me angry on Facebook. On Facebook, that's it's just, I mean, I shouldn't say, but I feel like everybody's just a bunch of fucking idiots, man. I mean, you know?
Dude, yeah. I feel you there. I mean,
but Instagram is just photos, so I don't get any of that stuff. It's just, you know, Reed doing kendama and all the cute girls that I follow, and maybe like Andrew posts that he won like the chili cook-off. You know, like that's it. You know, that's so much better. It's so much, you know, it's so much better that way.
Yeah, you want to get started on this book? Like, I mean, you read it all last night too, so.
Yeah, it's fresh as fuck for me.
Yeah.
Episode 2, here we go.
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4, Danny Glick and others.
And others.
The Glicks call the Petries to see about the boys. As it is past time, they returned. Danny and Ralphie never made it to the Petries. As Tony Glick leaves the house to go searching the woods, Danny stumbles into the yard. He doesn't remember anything between when they were attacked and now.
The parents were, I don't want to say interrogating, but they were like asking, hey, what happened? Like, where's your brother? He's like, well, we were in the woods. We were walking. He didn't want to tell him that he was trying to scare his little brother.
Yeah, he left that little detail out.
Yeah, he's telling him like ghost stories.
But Ralphie apparently sees like a ghost or whatever. Yeah, he sees something. And so then when Danny turns to look or whatever, then he doesn't remember anything.
I even think he says something bad happened. And they're like, well, what happened? And he's like, I don't remember. Yeah. I know I should, but I just don't.
He's kind of despondent, and he's like, he's not present fully.
Yeah.
5 days later, after he comes back, he collapses in the hall.
That's what it was.
And so then they take him to the hospital.
And then what did they say his symptoms? Oh, we don't know yet.
Yeah, nothing yet. They take him to the hospital. They run several tests. Nothing comes back.
Yeah.
They want to keep him and run more tests just to try and figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And we move on to Ben, who has been helping the search parties. 3 days into searching, he returns to the boarding house to find Susan cooking him something because he hasn't been eating well.
Yeah, he says he's been living on TV dinners, basically. Yeah. And so she's like, time for some home-cooked food.
Right. She says something like, I'm gonna cook you something good to eat before you fade away to a shadow or something like that. And then I think Eva's like around the corner and she's like, ha ha.
Yeah.
He likes that joke.
Yeah.
So she puts the casserole in the oven and they go outside to talk. While they're talking, Ben says that he's pretty sure that Ralphie's dead. Yeah, that's what his feeling is at this point.
Yeah. It even talks about how like, does she want his real answer, or does she want the answer that she wants to hear, you know? And it kind of shows that they're really trusting each other now, you know, like they're very trustworthy. He's telling him like, no, I think that kid's dead. Like, it's not a good answer, but it's the true answer that I think, you know. During
the interaction, Ben keeps becoming distracted by the Marston house. He keeps looking up at it whenever there's a point where he just fully isn't paying attention to what she's saying.
Yeah,
has to ask her to repeat herself. Yeah. What it is that she's saying is she's asking him if he wants to come over for dinner on Friday because Bill, her father, pointed out that he wanted him to come. He agrees. Susan fully notices that he keeps getting distracted by the Marston house, that it's definitely on his mind.
Yeah, in this point, I think she thinks how she loves him, but she can't say it to him.
She wants to say it, but she stops herself because she doesn't want to say it while he's distracted by the house.
Yeah, so
Well, that's the predominant issue.
She wants his undivided attention.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's a big L-bomb, you know?
Cut to our favorite realtor, Larry Crockett.
Oh, I love him.
He's reminiscing on his career and deals with the devil. We get some description on how he became successful by selling trailer homes.
Yeah, it said he didn't make money until he started flipping mobile homes, and it made it sound like it was like he was selling them to himself.
There's a lot of description without a lot of detail on how he was shadily doing business.
Yeah, how he's working the
he was
system.
like good with numbers, and so he was able to figure out how to beat the tax system. He had like
Oh,
a partner
that's what it
that he
was, yeah.
worked with. He had like, and I think at some point, it doesn't explicitly say it, but it makes it seem like he had a couple of companies himself at one time where he was selling mobile homes to, is like an incestuous business.
Yeah, that's what it said, incestuous.
And that's how he was able to get around taxes and things like that. And so
Interesting.
he like really stretched the money that he had and ended up making a shit ton of money. It says that he was, by the time that he made the deal, he was worth $1 million already at that point.
That's
Something
awesome.
like, yeah. So he was obviously like super successful selling the trailers. He was also like ahead of the curve, where trailers at the time that he started were still just the ones that you towed. No one lived in trailers really.
Mobile homes, yeah.
But he saw it being something that could be profitable by selling it to lower class people that didn't have money to buy a full house or whatever.
It talks about the blue collar people not being able to make a full down payment on a full house,
but they can make $500 to make on a mobile home. You know?
And then also how like older people wanted to stretch out their retirement and Social Security, so that
and then it's also only one floor, so they don't got a ton
upstairs.
Exactly,
yeah.
So he's just kind of like ahead of the curve on that
he's
specifically.
Very good at it.
So he's definitely a smart businessman, and he's successful, so that's why.
Yeah. At the end of that, we learned he hasn't heard from Straker in 14 months. So
he had been waiting. Yeah, they made the deal, knew that something was going to be coming because Straker said something's going to happen, or not something's going to happen, but I will be calling upon you for other things. Be ready to follow through.
Yeah.
At this, Straker calls Crockett. He has a task for Crockett. Needs a truck to pick up some cargo from the docks in Portland and deliver them to the shop and house. There are a lot of specific instructions.
Oh, yeah. And it's always go pick stuff up at the docks. Meet me at the docks or something.
Yeah, that's always where shady business happens, right?
It's always something is. Yeah, it's very specific. 5 stout Yale padlocks. I don't know Yale, but they sound good. You know, they're from Yale. They went to Yale.
Right.
Yeah.
But he needs them to go pick up the cargo at 7, not a second later or whatever he says. Bring it back to drop off some stuff at the house. There is one package that his people will know by the size of it that needs to go to the house. With the 5 locks that they pick up, they're supposed to lock the shop, lock the front door, back door, the shed, and the bulkhead for the basement.
Yeah, like the cellar.
And then leave the keys on the table in the basement.
Which is a weird spot to leave keys on the table.
That's the only place.
In the basement.
Well, that's the only place that he's having the movers go into in the house. So that's the only place
true.
they can leave it.
Yeah, that's true. I guess. Yeah, they wouldn't give him the key to the front
and
door.
And then
to
they
let
can
him
still
inside.
lock the bulkhead afterwards.
Yeah, they could look at it afterwards. Yeah.
So very specific instructions.
It's funny when he was taking his notes. I feel like he wrote down no later than 6, even though he had said 7. So he either was anticipating his guys being late, or he was just like trying to be early, he's just trying to be ahead. And then he's like, "Follow my directions explicitly." And then I got a little nervous for a second. I was like, "They're already not following you explicitly."
Yeah, I felt like it was. Crockett being like, he wants them there by 7. I'm gonna have them there by 6.
Yeah,
we're not fucking this up.
That's what I would like to think. So I was worried that he was gonna get there too early and see something he shouldn't, maybe, or I don't know.
Right, but, and then it cuts to his movers. They are arriving at the dock that they're supposed to 2 minutes later. It says 2 minutes of 7, so it's like 7:02. So they're late.
Yeah, Royal Snow and Hank Peters, they're late boys. So
they pull up. They go to where the packages are in the warehouse at the whatever specific wharf it is.
Yeah, pick up boxes at the wharf. They're warned of wharf rats that are supposed to be this mutant rat that's bigger and scarier than normal rats.
Yeah, they're just a bigger deal than regular rats.
And they sort of check inventory when they get there. They check the invoice, make sure the boxes are there.
They're
they
want to
make
do you want to go through this stuff good.
To make sure it's good? It's like, no, I want to just get this job done. My wife's...
Yeah, Hank wants to get back. He wants to finish the job early because he wants to get back to his wife. Royal is like, no, we should probably make sure that we've got the right shit. We don't want to fuck up. We don't know how imperative Crockett imparted this onto them, or if he just said, just don't fuck up.
Yeah.
But these are the people, Royal Snow and Hank Peters. They're 2 guys from the lot that Crockett employs for different jobs, including this one.
Yeah.
So they've worked with Crockett before. In the way that Straker approached Crockett the first time when they interacted, they said, we picked you for doing this for a reason because we know that you can be trusted to keep things on the down low. So, evidently Royal and Hank are also familiar with slightly underhanded dealings.
Yeah.
So they probably Royals, just in general doing the smart thing by making sure they got the right shit, but probably more so than now.
Reading the invoice that there's heroin and all kinds of drugs in there. He's like, shut up.
But he does notice on the invoice that there are no customs stamps, which he says is super bizarre because he used to work in the dock. When necessary, there were custom stamps all over the fucking place. Like, they were happy to stamp those things a million times.
Yeah.
But they're like, what are we going to do about it? Whatever, let's just take it on.
They continue without too much question.
I think that it's more than anything just cluing us in on it being a weird thing, which we're expecting to be a weird thing, but now the Royal and Hank are like, there's something weird about this. Yeah, we're kind of
seeing it from their point of view now.
Mm-hmm. So they load everything up, and then they take off to go drop everything off.
Half the packages are for the antique store, and the other half are for the Marston house.
I think everything is for the store. There's only one package going to the house, and it's the big sideboard.
Maybe it just felt like half of that. It's just
well, at some point they say half.
Oh, okay.
Which is this point, they get to the shop, they unload everything into the shop that's supposed to be there, which is everything but the one package.
Yeah.
They notice that there's an unpleasant odor. Hank in his head describes it as a general corruption that has happened there.
Yeah, like a whiff of old corruption. Yeah. It's just been shut up too long, he said, shining his flashlight around the long, empty room.
Which is a reasonable assumption at this point, because it was like an old washateria years and years ago, and at some point they might have said how long it's been shut down, but whatever, if it's been a closed building for 10 years even, it's plenty of time for everything to get nasty.
Yeah, for sure. But it definitely does make it seem like it's a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But it's just...
And then we get a little bit of a clue later on as well that it might be a little funky whenever... we'll get to it.
Yeah.
But so they finish that up, and then that's when they say, all right, well, that's half the job done. Yeah. And then it's like, well, now we're going to go do the more difficult half.
Yeah, I must have just turned that into half of the packages that were delivered rather than, all right, this half the job's done, now let's do the actual scary part. So
just half of the location.
Yeah.
So they go to the Marston house. They converse about, how creepy it is.
Yeah, they have like a childlike sense of fear. They're both grown men, and they know they shouldn't be scared, but it was just, the house is creepy. It freaks them out, and they don't get it. Yeah.
Well, it's been such like a local horror story for every kid that's grown up for the past 50 years, So they arrive there, start realizing just how much they don't want to unload the sideboard into the basement. It was heavy, he would think later, but not that heavy. He and Hank had muscled bigger loads for Larry Crockett, both upstairs and down. But there was something about the atmosphere of this place that took the heart out of you and made you no good. So they get it unloaded down into the basement. And by the time, once they get down there and, drop it off where it needs to be, they sort of realize that they're actually fucking terrified.
Yeah.
So they just get the fuck out of there.
Yeah, and then they realize they still have a few errands to do. Like,
yeah, they gotta go lock all the locks. It's like, fuck, we don't want to do this.
Yeah.
Hank is like, what if we just come back really early in the morning? And Royal's like, no, we need to fucking do it now. Yeah. It's going to be fucked up if we don't. So they do it. Royal goes to do like a couple and sends Hank to do the one. Hank is freaking out like the whole time. And we go into like Hank's perspective for while they split up, and Hank's freaking out. But then Royal like comes up on him and is like, Hank, we need to go drop off the keys. How you want to do this? And it freaks Hank out.
Yeah.
So they flip a coin to drop off the keys. Hank loses. He's like, Jesus.
And now I have to go down there again. Yeah, while he's down there, he takes his flashlight and he's flashing around, and I feel like we see one of the wharf rats or something, because it talks about this giant rat that we see on the table, and it like looks at him and he's not scared. It's
totally indifferent to him.
Yeah, it almost looks. I think he even says it almost.
It like
looks like
sits
the rat
up
smiles
on his back legs and is just like looking at him like, "What do you want, bud?"
Hey, bud. And it's that would freak me out too. So he throws the keys on the table. I don't think that's what scares him.
He hears like a click,
and then he throws the keys on the table, and we end up learning that it was one of the aluminum bands from the large chest that had popped, and it freaked him the fuck out.
Yeah, so he runs, he leaves, he like slams the bulkhead doors, he throws that lock on there, gets in the car. Royal's like, what happened? Hank doesn't say anything. He just bolts it, like fucking careens around the house. It says he doesn't slow down until he gets down to whatever one of the streets that they keep referencing that I forget.
Like 2nd Street or Main Street.
Yeah, whatever it is, yeah. So he gets to that street, and that's when he finally slows down. And Royal asks, what was down there? Royal asked. What did you see? Nothing, Hank Peters said, and the word came out in sections divided by his clicking teeth. I didn't see nothing, and I never want to see it again.
Yeah, that's a good little quote.
It's almost like he knows that there was nothing there, but he knows that the presence of the house is what is going on. which is something we learned more about going on, and something that we speculated on in the last episode as well, where we talked about where the house just has an evil presence.
Yeah.
There's an evil of the house that does something.
Yeah.
And it's like Hank knows that he experienced that at this point. Because I didn't see anything. I know I didn't see anything, and I definitely don't want to see it again. That's a thing that I don't want to have to go through again.
Mm-hmm.
So they end up, they get to Crockett's. They, check in with him, get their payment. Crockett is about to start closing up. Hank comes back into the office because he wants to say what he thought he saw down in the basement, which he thinks he saw some clothing, which fit a description that Ralphie Glick was wearing when he went missing. While he's giving that description, Crockett is thinking already like he saw something really bad, and Crockett's already, aware that something's probably going on with these guys. Oh yeah,
he knew originally. He said, if y'all are in the murder business, just don't tell me.
Yeah. And so he's like, fuck, he saw something. I don't want to deal with this. But he keeps like totally calm. He's a totally cool customer. And he's like, he pours Hank and him a drink. And then Crockett's like, well, if you saw that, then, I'll drive you down to the police station. We can, report it. But, I mean, what happens whenever this sort of thing goes down, it gets nasty. They're going to, they might find out about you and that waitress at Dell's, or they'll definitely find out about your dishonorable discharge and such like that. And so Hank's like, well, shit, maybe I didn't see anything at all.
Maybe I didn't.
Right, yeah.
That's so funny.
And so Crockett totally gets it pushed under the rug because he knows he can't afford to have any of the trouble, because Straker said he'll come for him if anything doesn't go the way that he wants it to.
Yeah, so all's good for Larry for right now.
And so Hank leaves after getting a little bit of extra money from Crockett. Crockett gives him some more hush money. Yeah. Says something like, I didn't pay you for that last job. Yeah. And Hank's like, well, no, you didn't. Crockett goes, man, you could tell me something tonight, and tomorrow I'd probably forget about it. Just further iterating, we should not think about any of this anymore. This is something we should never think about.
It's so funny, get the hint, dude.
Right, yeah. So Hank leaves. Crockett pours himself another drink. It doesn't close up shop like he was thinking about doing.
Just proud of himself, probably.
No, he's totally, turned over right now, freaked out about what it is that Hank saw. Yeah,
I was thinking he was good that he diverted Hank from him, but no, you're right.
Because he still thinks about, and it goes to great lengths, 2 or 3 times, about how he's not shaking. He's able to keep totally cool to keep it covered up. And so Hank leaves, and he's like, I need some more fucking whiskey. He's got some Johnny Walker that they were working on. And so he pours himself another drink, has another drink, and he's thinking about the deals with the devil. He's like, fuck, this is way worse than I ever thought it was going to be.
Yeah, okay, so he can only keep his outward cool, but his inward, he's freaking out.
He fully knows that this is truly a deal with the devil.
Definitely, yeah.
And then at that moment, the phone rings. He answers and doesn't say anything.
Speak of the devil.
He just listens, then says, it's taken care of, listens some more, and then hangs up. Yeah. And then pours himself another drink.
Yeah, he's drinking tonight. The next little section is Hank Peters. He goes home. He has a scary little nightmare about Hubert Marston. And he wakes up covered in sweat. And when his wife touches him to kind of comfort him, he screams bloody murder. That's literally the whole section.
Yeah, just to show that he's really fucked up about what happened. Mm-hmm. So then we cut to the next day or a day after, who knows how many days, but it's kind of middle of the day.
Yeah.
Some of the town's old men are hanging out at Milk Crossing's agricultural store. It gives a list of the old men that are there, but, whatever.
It must be a small town, dude, if they're hanging out at the freaking grocery store.
Well, it says something like the agriculture, that Milt's becomes the town hangout for the old guys whenever it's raining or the park is otherwise inaccessible. But then there's, probably some people that just hang out on any given Sunday as well,
Yeah, they're buddies with Milk.
In the same way that the old guys hang out at Whataburger back in Portland,
But at least
at 6 a.m.
Coffee.
Yeah, they're just there at 5 a.m. to start their day with coffee and then go do whatever they're going to do. Yeah.
Seniors drink free coffee.
Straker goes in to Milk Crossing store, shows up in a 39, or was it a 40?
That was the whole question. Yeah, that was the whole argument.
Whatever vehicle it is, I forget what I think you wrote it down, didn't you?
39 Packard is what I wrote. So I'll be 39, you be Team 40.
Okay.
It was a 39
I think it was
Packard.
a 40. So he shows up in this 39 or 40 Packard. He's there to buy some groceries.
Yeah, just a normal day, it seems like.
Yeah, he gets a bunch of meat and some flour and some bread and just a bunch of stuff.
It's just, it almost seems like he came from, like, a different time, though, like, because he pays with an old 20, like a
super old $20 bill that they give like a date or something like that, but it hasn't. It's supposed to have not been like regularly in circulation for the past like 30 years or something.
Yeah, they said it was like a little bit bigger than normal. It was like a Series E 20. It's still a legit 20. 20 is a 20.
Right, yeah, it's still legal tender, but it's like in the same way that like $2 bills are still legal tender. Nobody's using $2 bills, you know. The only $2 bill you ever see is whenever grandma pulls it out and is like, hey, check this shit out.
Or like for your birthday or something.
Right.
But yeah, so he paid with that old 20 and the 39 Packard. It's like the 70s now in the setting of the book. It had like no rust on it.
Yeah, so they make note of that. He says there was no rust on that thing.
Yeah.
That is weird.
Yeah, like either he just parked that baby when he bought it in 39 or 40, or
the men also make note that he just picked up that 30-pound carton of groceries under one arm like it was nothing.
And this is supposed to be like an old guy too, right? Like Straker's not supposed to be just some young
I don't know how much of a description. It definitely didn't say that he was young or ancient or anything. I think we get an age for him later whenever we get the report back from the FBI agent, but I think the assumption is that he's a middle-aged man.
Middle-aged, yeah, okay. So strong enough to pick up 30 pounds, but not
just be like, so just under my arm, here we go. Just good to go, yeah. So they're like, man, that's a strong fella. And then they start talking about all the other strange things that he paid with the old bill. Then they had the argument about, you know, what year car it was. I think
they ended on the argument for the car. They ended It's really funny just how he did that.
So then we cut to Ben. Ben Mears is writing. The search for Ralphie Glick is effectively over.
Yeah, weird.
It's not like officially called over, but it's raining today, so that's one main reason why they're not searching. But then it's also been, at this point, I think 10 days or something like that. They haven't found anything. So the general consensus is there's nothing else for us to find out here.
It's now like a missing persons case.
Yeah. So he's writing. Parkins Gillespie knocks on his door. He has a copy of Conway's Daughter. Parkins asks Ben to sign it for his wife. Ben says Weasel said that Parkins' wife had died 14 or 15 years ago.
Fucking Weasel.
Yeah. So then I have, so far, my favorite quote of the book. That's so, Parkins looked totally unsurprised. That Weasel, he does love to talk. He'll open his mouth too wide one day and fall right in.
Yeah, I like Weasel's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I like the constable too, Parkins.
Parkins Gillespie is, so far, my favorite good old boy from this town.
Yeah, he seems really chill.
He's just absolutely chill.
He's always smoking a cigarette.
Right, yeah.
Everywhere he goes, he
I wish I had been born in like the 50s or 60s and it was cool to just chain smoke everywhere. Yeah, if you could still smoke everywhere today, I would chain smoke. Absolutely.
There'd be so many chain smokers, I'm sure.
Right. After saying, that about Weasel talking too much and falling into his own mouth, Parkins kind of resignedly says, well, why don't you go ahead and sign it for me then?
Sign it for me?
Yeah. He had come in there under the guise of saying that it was for his wife who was shy, but it was actually for him the whole time, obviously. Yeah. So Ben signs it for him. More than that, Parkins is there to ask questions about the night that Ralphie disappeared. Wants to know what Ben's night was like because he's a new person in town. He's got to go around and ask these questions. This is his job as deputy
seems like a
constable.
very just polite interrogation, just more like a conversation than an interrogation.
He says at one point that he doesn't think it's Ben. He wants to just clear him. He's got to ask these questions so that he can officially say, "Look, it wasn't him. Let's continue doing whatever." Yeah. Ben is a little off-put by it because he's tired of being the new guy. So he's a little short here and there with some of the questions, but ultimately gives him everything that he wants, and then they're all good at the end. They're good to go.
Yeah. One thing at the that I thought was kind of fun was at the end, Ben was like, "Hey, can you tell me something?" And he's like, "Sure, I will if I can." He's like, "Where'd you get the copy of that book?" He's like, "I went down to some used books place and they were selling them 10 cents a piece," and he just like dies laughing. Yeah. He's like, "Man, my book's worth nothing now."
Right? Yeah. Well, because Conway's Daughter was the successful one.
That was the
first
successful
one.
book, yeah.
And the edition that Parkins has is the Bantam edition, which is like the mass producer of paperbacks. And so he already is looking at it, he's like, okay, this is the Bantam edition. It just makes him laugh looking back on the successful one and where it's at now. And he's like, yeah, I got it for like 10 cents. He sells paperbacks for 10 cents a piece. And Ben is just like, well, fucking hell, He's like dies laughing. So then we continue to follow Parkins, stops by the new furniture shop, which isn't open just yet, expected to open within the week or something like that. Wants to talk with Straker, who's there, though. And this is where we get more insight on the feeling of the shop. Parkins goes in there, and he smells the new paint, which he says, which the paint was a good smell, but you could smell something a little foul underneath it.
Okay, yeah. Forgot about that.
And so then he talks with Straker. They have an interaction where Parkins asks him a little bit about himself, wants to know about Barlow. Where's Barlow?
Yeah, we learn the partner's name. Do we know Barlow's name yet at this point? Or
Yes.
Kurt Barlow?
Well, we learned it during this interaction.
Yeah.
Mr. Barlow is evidently on a buying trip in New York, not expected back until October 10th.
Nice.
Then Parkins asks Straker what Barlow's first name is. And that's and then Straker's like, "Are you asking in your official capacity, Constable?" Parkins is like, "No, I'm just curious." Because he's playing everything off. He's very low key, just finding out what he can.
He's just doing
while being perfectly pleasant.
Yeah.
But then Straker relents anyways and says his name is Kurt Barlow. They've been working together for a while. They worked together in London and Hamburg previously. And this is their retirement. Coming to Salem's Lot, they're going to sell furniture just enough to pay the bills, but be able to take it easy.
The constable is still smoking, obviously, and when he's over at their house, he can't find anything
at
to
the
ash
shop.
in. Or at the shop, sorry. He can't find anything.
Yeah, he's looking for an ashtray or
There's
something.
no ashtray, there's no nothing. So he ashes
in his pocket. Yeah, in his shirt pocket.
I was like, man, that's funny.
Parkins asks if there's been any trouble at the Marston house, kids pranking, throwing rocks, that sort of thing. Because that's when people, when you get to somebody new moved into town, kids might do things like that. Because
especially construction, man. When there's construction, when I worked in there, every day you'd have to go and you'd have to you count the windows or whatever, make sure they're all good, and then you check them again the next day because kids walk by fucking throwing rocks just because they're bored and they're like, well, they'll just put a new.
And if kids
window.
are bored with nothing to do today doing that.
Oh,
kids had absolutely nothing going on in the mid 70s in a small town. What the hell? They're probably, I'm surprised there's any windows intact in that town.
No one should have a window in town.
Right. Straker says, no, nothing's happened. Parkins mentions that a kid has gone missing. Straker sort of acts surprised. He's like, oh, well, that's a shame, blah, blah. They have kind of a funny goodbye interaction. Or they both have a misunderstanding where Parkins says something.
He says something about calling them hoolums or something, like the kids, and then Straker's like, what? And he's like, kids, have you seen any kids around? And he's like, oh no, I haven't seen any. He's saying young'uns, but he runs it together so much that it's like young'uns or something like the way that it's spelt is really weird. So Straker's like, what? And or I guess he's not like what, he's like, what? Because he's like he's totally flat or whatever, and he's just like a emotionless, is what it is.
Accentless voice. Yeah. So Parkins clarifies that, and then whenever Parkins is on the way out, sending by, Straker says "ciao," and Parkins is like, "What?"
Yeah, I've never heard
And so
that.
then Parkins is like, "That's the commonly held term for goodbye, the Italian term for goodbye."
Yeah, the familiar Italian expression for goodbye, which almost makes it sound like, "Hey, we're friends now, right?" And Straker's trying to get it in his head. I think
maybe a little bit, yeah. And then
at least that's what I thought.
And then as Parkins closes the door, but he's like, "Well, it's not familiar to me." And then
yeah, he's all mad about it. He's like, "It's not nothing I've heard of," and his cigarette's all ruined.
Yeah, because of the rain. Because now it's taken up to a pretty heavy pour. And then as he walks off, it lets us know that Straker's watching him leave and is no longer smiling. Cut to Parkins getting back to the office at the municipal building. He calls the Portland FBI branch, gets a hold of an agent,
Hanrahan,
yeah.
Rahan.
He asks for anything that they have on Ben, Throckett, and Barlow.
Yeah, we don't even know how you spell Kurt, so we know nothing about these guys yet.
Right, yeah.
So we're pretty fresh. They know nothing about these two. They come into town, and then there's no Google, so you can't even just Google Ben.
Right.
So you have to.
Yeah. So he wants to call the FBI, which is obviously one of the first things that you would do when you're trying to look up somebody law enforcement wise, because if they have a record, it's on record. With Barlow being people from out of the country, they'll be on record for having been out of the country, and they can probably see their travel and stuff like that as well. So
that's a good point.
So he calls the FBI branch. The agent that he gets a hold of asks if he thinks it's related to the missing boy. He says, I don't know. I just want to, need to find out about them. And I also am curious if they have any connection because both Ben and the two came to town at around the same time.
Yeah, and then also the kid disappeared around the same time.
Yeah, right.
All of it's
just a lot of coincidences. You got to look it up.
Yeah.
So then we cut to this section is a couple of pages, which is just the gossip over the phone lines.
It's the same chick with the binoculars. She's just eyeing everybody down.
She's definitely. I think that it's a couple of conversations going on.
Oh, is it?
I think that it's there's a couple that I think it gives away who it is that's talking, but I think that there's multiple conversations that were being given. The snippets of.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of.
This section is just to illustrate that the town being a small town and the gossip that we've already been told about. This
point.
is the information going throughout the town and how everything kind of mulls around and everybody knows everything that comes around through the grapevine. It's painting a picture of the current mental state of the town as a whole.
Yeah.
Because the town is very much a character in this book as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. The town is a character, which is, when you put it like that, that's a great point. The next little section is just
Danny Glick's medical chart.
Exactly, yeah. And
they're thinking about discharging him soon. His symptoms lead them to suspect that there's secondary pernicious anemia accompanied with mental shock.
Yeah, he has an extremely low red cell count. It's 45%, it says.
Then the nurse on duty at the time, it's like 1 a.m. or something like that, goes to give Danny his medicine for that time.
Yeah.
Finds that he's not in bed.
Oh.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
And finds him on the ground. She thinks, maybe he just got to go to the restroom and he fainted.
Mm-hmm.
But as she gets to his body, finds that he's dead.
Yeah, that sucks for that family, dude. They lose one son, can't find him, and then the other one dies. It's like, fuck, that's just the Glicks.
The book's like getting really heavy at this point. Oh, yeah.
So, chapter 5, Ben 2.
Ben is at the Nortons for dinner. Bill seems to be appreciating Ben more, and is the same. They're barbecuing out back this time.
Yeah.
And they're kind of hanging out. There's a mention disappointedly going over the Red Sox winning chances at a pennant. Which is funny because that year the Red Sox actually go to the World Series.
Oh, cool.
1975.
One scene that was fun that kind of, I don't know why all the
they lose that year, but they go to the World Series.
It's funny. They have the barbecue. They finish the barbecue. They're all sitting around gossiping and smoking cigarettes. It sounds like, just...
It's awesome.
Just like the old days. Yeah, it sounds fun.
That's just like any given night in the backyard of the Hedrick's house, man.
Oh, yeah.
Because mom and dad grill all the time. Probably, and depending on the weather as well, but pretty frequently it's probably 3 times a week that's dinner.
Your dad uses lump charcoal too. He goes all out, right?
Not anymore. He's got a new grill that does pellets.
Oh, nice. Those are awesome.
Yeah, that's a badass grill. But then, and then also, Sundays all we do is sit out back and watch football and smoke and drink.
Fun.
So yeah, that's the best. That's my favorite. That's one of my favorite things to do is just cook and hang out outside, smoking and drinking and hanging all day, watching whatever it is that's going on.
That's why we want to retire and be the coffee drinkers at Whataburger.
Oh, yeah, dude. Talking about just different things in the town.
Yeah, once they started to do the little bit of the actual town gossip, the men learned that Ralphie died.
Danny
died. Danny
yeah.
died. Yeah. So it was just I looked down and I saw Ralphie and I was like, that's one of them.
Right, it's one of them.
It's one of them. Yeah. No, Ralphie's the one that went missing, who was kind of a shit kid anyway.
Yeah, he's just a younger little brat kid, and, the younger brat brother.
And then but Danny died in the hospital today. And they were like,
and
shit.
Bill and Ben didn't know that. And being, a housewife that spends a lot of time on the phone, which was the previous section, the illustration of the gossip going around. And then Susan had heard it down at Milt's. She, I guess, probably going to go get groceries for tonight or whatever. So they're like, oh, shit. And there's Anne thinks something like, how could they not know? It's just the talk of the town.
It's the talk of the town.
Not everybody spends all day on the phone, okay?
Yeah.
Ben asked Susan if she'd like to go for a soda at Spencer's. She would. As they're leaving, Bill and Ben make a joke about Carl Yadrzymski, which I don't understand. And I tried to figure out what it might... Because Carl Yadrzymski was a left fielder for the Red Sox back then. And I know about him because he's tied for the record for most seasons with a single team or something like that. Cool. He spent his entire career in Boston. Mm-hmm. And then he's got some other records. He's got a lot of club records. He's got most RBIs and things like that. And a bunch of different stuff. But I don't understand what this joke is about.
Yeah,
and it bothers me because they say something like, Bill says, "Why don't you come over, bring us 6-pack over tomorrow, and we'll watch the game and make fun of that goddamn Yadrzymski." And then Ben says, "Oh yeah, that would be fun, but what are we going to do after the second inning?"
Yeah,
and I don't understand what that means. Because this is still during his prime in '75. He goes on to play another 10 years or something like that.
Yeah.
So I don't get what's going on with this.
Yeah, the only part of that joke that I got was just that they would be drinking the beer so fast they'd be done by the second inning. That was the only
That
part
must
of
be
the
what
joke.
the joke is then.
That's the only part of the joke that I got. It was just that, like...
That totally went over my head, and I feel like a fucking idiot now.
I thought it was more about the baseball guy than that
No,
part.
the joke was so obviously about the six-pack now that you say that. That's so obvious.
Yeah, that
and
was
I totally
the part
missed
that I
it.
got.
Yeah. So that's what it is. And it makes so much sense because previously, whenever they first met, they had made jokes about beer too, drinking beer. He was like, hey, you want a beer, blah, blah, blah. And Ben's like, you couldn't take me away from it. Yeah, I'm out of luck 2 or maybe more. And, they laugh about that. So they're obviously, find kinship in their drinking habit.
Is that how you win the girlfriend's dad over? You just make jokes about beer?
I guess so. I don't know.
If they drink beer, beer jokes are good. You're in.
Right. I'm going to take, if I ever end up going on enough dates with somebody to meet their parents, I'm going to take everything I learned from Salem Slot.
There you go.
I'm going to use it in that situation. They leave. Susan doesn't want to go to Spencer's. She'd rather go to the park. They do. As they sit on the grass, Susan asks about the book. Ben says that it's hard to figure out how to tell her. He wants to tell her about the book, but he can't get his words together for it. And then they end up banging.
Yeah, they just
right there in the middle of the park.
Yeah, dude, never done that before in the park. She's like, can you tell me about the book? And he's like, I'm trying to find the words to do it. And she's like, can you find them while you kiss me? And he's like, no. Basically,
that might make it hard to figure out. That might make it hard, but let's find out.
Yeah, it's like, I'm going to try,
one thing leads to another, and they end up banging.
Yeah, nice.
So then after that, they're walking around, kind of aimlessly, and...
just sort of the afterglow of a really nice time. They're both kind of mesmerized by each other. It feels like they're both just really happy, and he even asks, like, do you regret doing that? And she's like, no, I'm really happy. Like, I feel good. Like, that was right.
And then they're kind of they're just kind of chilling about it, walking around. I think they talk a little bit, but then...
Oh, they pick back up and she learns what the book's about.
Yeah. Yeah. Asks him about it again. Ben figures out how to explain what it is that's going on, what it is that he wants the book to be about. He talks about having investigated Hubie Marston, finding out from Marston's sister-in-law, Manella Corey, that he was a contract killer for the mob. The trucking was a front. In Boston, Marston killed a lot of people. Ultimately was forced into retirement by his employers when he got brought in by the Malden police over an 11-year-old boy that had been killed.
Dude, just the general using of Hubie every now and then when they say Hubie instead of Hubert, it's just like, quit trying to make this monster seem like a buddy. Giving him a cute little nickname like Hubie.
Yeah. Well, there's also and I don't wonder if there's not a little bit of inspiration for that from Whitey Bulger, who was a huge mobster in Boston.
I'm sure there was.
And it's like a big deal. He actually just died.
Dude, I just heard about Whitey today. Apparently, he agreed.
He was transferring prisons.
Oh.
And whenever he got to the new prison, the prisoners there just immediately beat the shit out of him until he died.
Oh, fuck.
And
no, that's not the story. I heard about something else that he did. Like, I heard that he...
Oh, he did all kinds of crazy. He was like... Well, I heard he held that city, like, in terror.
Well, I heard while he was, like, in jail, like, the military, like, were running tests on people, and they were like, they would make your sentence better or whatever, like, if you agreed to let them run tests on you. And apparently they let him run tests, and I think he was part of, like, MK Ultra or something, they ran, like... They hit him with like psychedelics and shit and like fucked with his brain, and he's like pissed off. He like never forgave him. I literally listened to that like on the drive here.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's on a conspiracy show podcast that I listen to, so who knows if that's
true at all. Well, it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of stuff like that goes on. But yeah, he just died. Like it might have been 2 weeks at this point.
That's
he was transferring prisons, and when he got to the new place, the other inmates just immediately killed him.
Wow.
They figured that it was inside job, that it was retaliation from another. There's probably like some other mob that just waited until this moment to have the hit finally put on, or go through on him. But yeah, he was big time fucking mobster. There's a movie that just recently came out in the past like 3 years called Black Mass. That was about him.
Cool. I'll have to...
I haven't seen it. I wanted to see it, but I heard that it was good. At the very least, the whole Whitey Bulger story is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I wrote that down. I'm going to watch that. So back to the book, though.
Yeah, so Marston killed a shit ton of people. Whenever Ben asks Manella how many people, she like wiggles her fingers up and she's like, how many times can you count these? And he's like, shit, okay, that's a lot of fucking people. But apparently the Boston organization starts getting worried about Hubert. He gets picked up twice like in a year or something like that, the Boston police pick him up for a gangland killing, which he's back on the street in a couple of hours. But then the Malden police, which Malden is a little city north of Boston,
Okay.
picked him up on suspicion of this 11-year-old boy that got killed, which Minella describes it to him as the boy was eviscerated or something like that.
Jesus Christ.
And so his employers are like...
Oh, literally, yeah. I just see that word, eviscerated. Yeah. Jesus Christ.
So his employers... They get him out because he probably knows too much. They don't want him... or Ben suspects that he probably... I think he said something. He knew where a few bodies were buried. So they're, well, okay, we got to get him out or else he's going to flip on us. Get him out of Boston. He can't do anything anymore. So they get him out of trouble. He leaves Boston to go retire, and that's why he ends up there. But during the 11 years that Bertie and Hubert were there, 4 kids went missing, and no one ever found any of the bodies or anything. And so Ben suspects that it was Hubert Marston that did that because he just keeps thinking, he goes back to that boy in Malden, thinking about how, that happened. And he was, more or less caught for it. How many other times did he capture little boys and whatever? Or was that the first one? And so he continued doing it whenever he got to Salem's Lot. Who knows what it is, but that's the connection that he's making.
Dang. Makes him sound like one of those preverts that Ralph
preverts.
So that he knew all about. But one thing that I thought was interesting about this little chapter that just might have been, not that important, but it was... when they start talking about like the house again after Ben tells Susan, right? After he tells her all of the history that he found out, he says, I never thought that the house would be owned. Like I thought that when I would come back that it might have been torn down, it might
or still abandoned or whatever, just like anything but somebody owning it and occupying.
Yeah. So he just feels like out of control, and it would like he came to Salem's Lot to get control so that he could write his story about his experiences and stuff. And then now he kind of feels a little out of control. So it's
thrown him off a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's affecting his writing.
And that's part of why he couldn't really put it together how to explain it to her, because he didn't really know. Yeah. I think he says something about, at first it was just going to be about the town. The book was going to be about the town in itself.
Oh,
and,
yeah, okay, yeah.
With and whatever, the town and the people, blah, blah, blah. But now and I was just going to use the Marston house as a way to like, get into a headspace and things like that, but now it's all about the Marston house because I've been thrown off and I don't know what to go on, and then finding out more and more about what was going on with Hubert. And then I think what really sticks at the end of his interaction with his sister-in-law, a sort of weird thing where she describes how she knew that her sister was killed.
Oh yeah, that was really weird.
Even though she was down in Cape Cod, and he was obviously up here in Maine, knew when it happened because she had like almost like a telepathic connection at that moment of the murder.
Yeah, like she thought she got her head blown off or something, right?
Right,
she looked down and saw blood, but it was really like her. Dang, that was such a weird scene to read too, because I was like, did she get shot? No, okay.
But then she also goes on to say something about evil people. And she says there are evil men in this world, and a lot of the times they just work from the shadows, but once in a while you learn of an evil man that's, out in the open doing their business. And she says, like, I was cursed with the knowledge of 2 truly evil men in my life. One of them was Adolf Hitler, and the other one was Hubert Marston.
Damn.
So that further into the whole narrative of the Marston house being an evil place, having drawn its evil off of Hubert Marston because he was a truly evil person, as described by his sister-in-law.
Yeah, if he's as bad as Hitler.
Right.
That's pretty bad.
And I pull a quote from right after that. I think that house might be Hubert Marston's monument to evil. Ben suspects that the evil of Hubert Marston persists in the house and has either possessed the current tenant or drawn to it another evil man. Cut to this whatever section. They're walking back to the house. Anne sees Ben and Susan returning. She doesn't trust him. She is like, go away, Ben Mears. Leave her alone.
That's my precious baby.
Right. It's not totally meaningless. What it's showing us is that it's going to be a problem later on.
Yeah.
Anne Norton's going to do something stupid that throws off there's going to be some like climax in what happens where Ann Norton does something because she doesn't like Ben, and it's going to ruin something that's happening.
Or she's going to stick her nose in too deep, just like you just said. I mean, she calls to see if they went to go get sodas, and then she finds out they didn't.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, these freaking liars.
Jesus Christ, your daughter's 25 or whatever we figured out last week.
Let her go live her life.
Then outside in the yard, presumably, Susan asks Ben not to mention any of his theories to anyone else and to lock his room at night.
Both good calls.
Yeah.
Good calls.
Susan says he should think of himself as under suspicion, and that if she didn't love him, she would think as much herself.
Love?
Yeah. So this trips Ben out. Ben goes back to Ava's, but he can't sleep or write because he's too tripped out about her saying that she loves him.
He was happy.
Yeah, he's totally excited about it, but it's like a little unbelievable.
You're right. It didn't trip him
well.
up. You're right. That is a good way to say it.
So he's like, well, fuck it. I'll go to Dell's. He hasn't ever been there. So he's like, well, I can't do anything. What else am I going to do? I'll just sit here. I'll go to Dell's and see what's going on there. See if I can, distract myself, I guess.
Is this the first time we've heard of Dell's?
It's not the first time we've heard of Dell's. This is the first time Ben goes there.
Okay, yeah. So just the local bar to remind anyone that might have forgotten.
So Ben goes to Dell's, runs into Weasel Craig there who hails him. And so he's like, oh, thank God there's somebody I know.
Somebody here.
He didn't know what to expect, never having been there. So he goes to sit with Weasel. They're talking a little bit, but then Matt Burke, cool English teacher extraordinaire, enters the bar, and Weasel flags him down as well because they're old friends. Matt has read Air Dance and knows who Ben is. I think Air Dance was his second book, I think.
I think so. I think you're right.
Either his second or third. It's one that gets panned by the critics, but like other people like.
It's the one Susan was reading too, right?
Yeah. So there's a bit of introduction and some light backstory for the two where they kind of introduce themselves to each other.
Yeah.
Matt finds out. Yeah, Matt learns how Ben had spent some time there years ago in Salem's Lot, and that he had taught Ben's aunt that he was staying with, because Matt's been a teacher in Salem's Lot for a really long time at this point.
It sounds like only in Salem's Lot since he got his degree.
Right. So at some point, Weasel leaves to go to the restroom. Matt Burke asks Ben about his interest in the Marston house, which he's gathered through interactions with other people in the village. And Ben cautiously humors his questions because he's thinking about what Susan had just said. Don't be telling everybody all the crazy stuff that you're thinking. But Matt seems to be on a similar page as Ben, so Ben's like, okay, I can talk with him. He's not is at least in the undercurrent thinking along the same lines as me.
Yeah.
Though Matt's perspective on the whole matter, in my opinion, seems to be more from the town's perspective rather than the house, where Ben is so focused on the house. Matt is seeing everything from the perspective of the town. Being a part of the town makes sense. Ben speculates that the house is like an idol over the town. You have said it precisely. The Marston house has looked down on us all for almost 50 years, at all our little peccadillos and sins and lies, like an idol. Matt asks Ben to come speak at his creative writing class at the high school.
4th period.
Ben agrees. They are informed that Weasel has passed out in the restroom. They go to retrieve him, and Ben takes him back to Ava's. Then Ben gets Weasel back to the boarding house, gets him up to his room. Ava says that she'll finish taking care of him. She's done it a million times before.
Yeah, that's basically just, Weasel's okay.
Right.
Ben's okay. Yeah. We all made it home safe.
There's like sort of a sad, sweet part where they first get into the boarding house. Weasel's like sleep talking about something. And then Ava's like, oh, you do carry on, don't you? And the sound of her voice brings him back where he's like, I do, blah, blah, blah. So that, in my opinion, further goes back to what I had speculated about last week, where like he still holds a lot of feelings for her from whenever they were, getting together.
And it seems
after
like
her husband died.
Yeah.
And she certainly cares for him after a fashion, but it seems that he's more invested in those feelings than she is.
It does seem like that. Yeah, you're right.
I mean, or if otherwise, why wouldn't they just have gotten married?
Right.
Obviously, that's not like really much of an option now because now he's an alcoholic. But at the time, it sounded like he had a decent job, that he was doing well. And then they started sleeping together, cut it off, and then that's when he really went downhill.
Yeah.
But, whatever. That's just, a little bit of, that's more character speculation than anything. That probably won't ultimately matter too much. But that's the end of the chapter. Chapter 6, The Lot 2.
Yeah, the first section just kind of sets the scene for...
it's just a description of how seasons roll in the lot, which I can attest to, having lived a year in New England. It sounds about right.
Yeah, I don't know if much more mattered in that chapter than that, other than just kind of learning about the
just setting some scenery. Yeah. Good stuff for a novel. It's certainly not uncommon. God, the Redwall novels are like every like new part of one of the books is like 2 pages of describing whatever season it currently is.
That might
and
have been
stuff
why
like
I could
that.
never get into them. It was just
It's
like
a lot.
starting off. It was like I don't know.
Brian Jake spends a lot of time describing things, especially, and this is one of the big deals of the whole Redwall series is the food that he spends so much time describing, to the point where they've been able to write cookbooks on it.
The Redwall cookbooks.
Because everything is so thoroughly explained that they can be like, oh, well, I know how to make that. I can let's make a cookbook about it.
That's so funny.
But it is all really good sounding shit.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally forgot about that until just now. I need to buy that cookbook. But then we move on to September 28th, which is the quote-unquote the first day of real fall, which was the day that Danny Glick was buried in the Harmony Hill Cemetery.
Yeah.
We start with Mike Ryerson there, who dug the grave. He, being the town, what did they call him in our first episode? They called him like the town custodian or something like that. But mostly what he did was oversaw the different cemeteries or groundskeeper, as they call him, the town groundskeeper. He interacts with Father Callahan a little bit when everybody starts getting there, asks him how long he thinks the ceremony is going to be.
Yeah, Father, what was his name?
Father Donald Callahan.
Yeah, Father Callahan.
The Catholic priest in town.
Yeah,
There's 3 churches. There's a Methodist church, a Church of Latter-day Saints, and then the Catholic Church.
And you'd think the Catholic Church would have the longest funeral, but I think that
Father
it
Callahan
specifically
seems
says
to,
Father Callahan.
and that's part of why, because Mike Ryerson has this like 2-page inner dialogue about how he doesn't like the other 2. Like he doesn't go to church. He stopped when he was 16 because of a bunch of different reasons and stuff like that. But Father Callahan is his favorite of the 3 church leaders for a bunch of different reasons. Like the Methodist guy is like a crazy person or something like that, and then the Church of Latter-day Saints guy is like just like a jerk or something like that. Or something. I can't remember the different descriptions because I didn't care. But he likes Callahan for being short and to the point for different things, and being a overall more agreeable person to Mike.
Yeah, I mean,
talks about how Mike suspects that he's a drinker because he's got a bunch of broken blood vessels in his face.
That he didn't get from whatever he said. He said he didn't get it from like Pop and Zits or whatever. I don't think he said that,
something like that. Yeah,
something like he didn't get it from.
He's like,
he knows what he got it from because he's a drinker too, probably.
Right. Yeah. So he asked him how long it's going to be. He's like 10 minutes. Okay, well I'm gonna. So he's like, okay, well he thinks to himself, I'll just go down to the creek, have my lunch, and by the time I'm done with that, I can come back and finish. Put the dirt over the body.
Yeah, nobody wants to see a gravedigger at a funeral. So
while Father Donald Callahan is painting this glorious picture of heaven, and then there's the guy who's going to finish burying the body.
Yeah, in the background,
kind of puts a damper on the pretty picture.
Yeah, when he's off, waiting, killing time. There was one scene that I thought was pretty cool. He goes by this headstone that he sees that's fallen forward, and he goes to like check it out.
Yeah,
and it turns out to be Hubert Barclay Marston's gravestone, October 6th, 1889 to August 12th, 1939. And the last little thing, it has like a little quote. It says, "The angel of death who holdeth the bronze lamp beyond the golden door hath taken thee into dark waters." And then below that, almost obliterated by 36 seasons of freeze and thaw, "God grant he lie still." Yeah. Which is like, is he a ghost or is he a monster? Like, what?
Right.
Like, why does we want God to keep him still?
He was a monster.
A monster
and then
in real life.
Whoever it was that was in charge of getting that done, of getting the headstone done, because it's not like his wife did that.
Or he did it.
So it was either, it just fell to the responsibility of the town, but more likely, at the time, his sister-in-law would have still been alive, and she probably would have been next of kin. And so her knowing everything that she knew was probably like, put this at the end of it. It's just as even at the least, just like as a bit of a ward. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Please just let him stay there.
Yeah, King is so good at making things spooky. It's just like, right. I reread that today and I was like, how did I miss that? That is so creepy.
So then it's the ceremony. Father Donald Callahan leads the ceremony. Tony Glick loses it. So obviously Danny's father. Mm-hmm. Loses it. He's screaming. He has to be held back and different things. At the end of it, Marjorie Glick faints.
The Father Callahan does a really nice job, I think, of powering through.
Yeah, kind of all you can do in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's either you stop and wait and let him get it all out of his system, or you just power through.
Right. Mike Ryerson returns to the grave to get to work. Royal Snow has not showed up to help. Mike sort of curses him. But it starts to work all the same. What else are you going to do? He can't shake the feeling of being watched.
Yeah.
He thinks, what is it? Is it Royal? No, Royal didn't show up. He looks up to the Marston house a couple of times. Gets kind of drawn to it. More than once, he loses chunks of time. He loses like 20 minutes at one point, and he loses an hour at another point. Yeah, and he's only
done like 10 scoops or something by the time he's been an hour in. Yeah. He's like, dude, this grave should
He's like falling into trances, being sucked into the Marston house, and with the paranoia of thinking that somebody's watching him. He's just getting lost in all of that. There's a point where he enters a full-on fever of paranoia. Decides that it must be Danny's corpse that is watching him, thinking, well, his eyes must have opened back up. You know, the glue that they used to keep his eyes closed during the funeral must have worn off, and now his eyes are open, and it's him that's looking at me, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Eventually he snaps and loses, and he jumps down in there, starts trying to remove all the dirt that he put on there, and then breaks the lock on the casket. The book says he has like one last moment of clarity where he's like, what the hell am I doing, blah, blah, blah. But then he jumps out of the grave and then opens it up. And Danny's eyes are open. Which creepy. We don't know, is it a hallucination? Because he's already in a fever pitch. Or did it actually happen? Who knows? Yeah. We don't really know because then at that point, darkness envelops him. Well, this whole time he's like racing against the clock because in the back of his mind he's like, I don't want to be here past dark. No. Because he's got this sense of dread. He's like, I don't want to be here past dark. And then the last line is like, and then, night falls or whatever it is because the sun goes down fully behind the Marston house at this point. Yeah. A lot of symbolism about, time or having to get done before dark and the sun going down behind the Marston house. The source of the evil, the source of the dread for not wanting to be there past dark is the thing that brings night. Yeah. And then there's also another thing that you brought up in the notes, which I think you're about to bring up about the comparison in the prayers. Yeah,
that was really cool. It was like the dark figure that was like sacrificing the baby, or
at the end of our last section of reading.
The last section, yeah, that was like couldn't have been a better spot to
end. Right, yeah.
But he even writes it in the book. He has them side by side. Let us pray for our brother to our Lord Jesus Christ, who said, "Oh, my Father, favor me now." And then it goes down.
Yeah, and it's like a line-by-line comparison of the typical Catholic prayer and the incantation almost that the shadow figure was doing. And there's a lot of parallels in how it was there, which is obviously designed by King from the beginning, I'm sure. But it is really neat to see the parallels there.
It's very cool. So now we're on to Mark Petrie. We learn about his house. He's from like an old house that was like heated and ventilated from the kitchen.
At one point,
upstairs bedroom. They don't use that system anymore, but right now...
But the vents are still in place and they carry audio very well. So he uses it to listen in, which is something that he's done in the past, apparently. There's a short section about how his dad had caught him listening at the door one time and said, if you do that, you might hear something about yourself that you don't want to know.
Yeah, never listen at a knothole lest you be vexed. Which means, you don't want to hear... You might hear something about yourself that you don't want to know.
But then, and Mark thinks, but there was another saying, forewarned is forearmed, or something like that.
Yeah, that's exactly what it
was. This whole family is just like throwing out old idioms left and right at each other.
I think he even complains about it, too. He's like, my parents don't it almost sounds like he says, like, my parents don't have a spine. They're so artsy. Like, they can't... They're just like, they're more theory than practice.
I mean, maybe so, but I didn't get that feeling. There is a section where he brings it up. Where he says,
"Oh, okay."
He says, or it's like he loved them dearly, but sometimes he thought that they were just old, or
something like that. Yeah.
Like they're just like they spend a lot of time bringing out these old, sayings and idioms and whatever. But he also does very evidently have the mindset and the mental maturity of an 11-year-old or however old they are. I assume he's the same age as Danny, who was 12. And some of the ways that he interprets things and says things. But yeah, he's working on a model of a Frankenstein's monster because he's got like a collection of horror figures. And he's finishing it up to go with them. He's listening to his parents' conversation through the vents that we talked about. They're going over, they're afraid that everything that has happened might be affecting him. Trying to think of, is it affecting him? What do we do if it's affecting him? But ultimately, they resolve that he's okay. Yeah. That he's cool-headed and level-headed enough to be okay, to be able to take it in stride and not be freaking out about it. Probably even grow from the ideas of death and grief. Mark is pretty damn sure of himself in the way that he is thinking throughout this whole thing. Sort of in the same flavor that whenever we first meet him, he thinks of all that in a fifth of a second. Like, I don't care. That's too much. I think it feels like we're... almost deifying him to a degree where he's the cool kid, or not the cool kid, but he is so awesome as a character. He's the badass kid who really can do it or whatever.
Gets it. Yeah, King, I feel like in a lot of his books, he always has...
He focuses on a lot of kids. In
got
the
a
movies
kid.
that I've
Yeah.
seen, or even just not on kids necessarily, but they either are kids or childhood is very important to whatever it is that's happening in the true story. And what I've seen of his movies and what I've heard of other books.
Yeah, like in It, it happens to the kids in the beginning. In the Dark Tower, there's a boy that is one of the main characters.
Right.
And
there's definitely, like you said, King spends a lot of time focusing on kids and childhood,
which I think is cool because kids don't really get much of a voice.
It's a good way to and it's a good way to develop characters and to develop story as well, because certainly like in It, where it jumps back and forth between the kids and then them as adults, that's a really good way to be able to develop a story because it's happening over 30 years or whatever. So you give yourself a lot of time to then develop a story in that way. And then a relatable story too, because everybody's grown up.
Yeah, everybody's been
Everybody that is alive has literally been a child and then not been a child. So yeah, he's pretty damn sure of himself. He's reflecting on how he's outsmarted bullies, and he has a reflection on when his dog died.
Oh, yeah.
And sort of almost thinks that he handled it better than his mom, because he didn't cry at the time. And he says, like his mom cried. He was, upset and will take the memory of his dog with him forever, but he will do that because he didn't cry it out right then.
Like his mom sort of just cried the memory away
and then was able to move on immediately and not think about it like he says like 3 days later or something like that. But whereas Mark will always remember the dog because he didn't cry.
Yeah,
and it's like, I get the idea there, but you're kind of being a shithead.
Yeah, I know, right?
And then to literally end this section, it ends on this kind of immature. Or not immature, but a mentality of, I guess to better illustrate the age of Mark and where he is at mentally, says, understand death? Sure. That was when the monsters got you. It's like, so no, you don't actually understand death. You just, your only relation with death was one, when your dog died, and then two, what you've seen in the horror movies and stories that you are, really into.
And then now with Danny and then Ralphie's disappearance, it's...
Yeah. But he's totally interpreting it the wrong way or whatever, that's when the monsters got you. No, it's not.
Unless it's one of those preverts.
Right. But he's 12 years old. You can't expect too much, beyond something of that like. Then we move on to Royce McDougal, who arrives home drunk. He finds Sandy and Randy in the mess of a trailer. Randy's nose is bleeding. He confronts Sandy about hitting Randy. She says he rolled over and hit his nose. Royce fights it for a second, but ultimately he gives up. He's totally beaten by life. Yeah,
it was like a half-assed attempt. He just starts yelling at her, "Get me my dinner!"
From the beginning of him showing up, we know that he's just totally defeated by life. He gets out of his car. He went to Dell's after work. He'd been drinking for 5 hours or something at this point.
Jesus.
Because he got off at 3 and it's now like 8 or something like that. I can't remember. I did some of the math. But he's like sort of, I work all the time and you begrudge me a couple of beers after work on the weekend. Fuck off, blah, blah, blah. And he trips over some flagstones that he had been meaning to make a walkway. And just, everything is just, he's like, fuck it. He says what a life or something. Isn't this just some life? And
there's kind of an odd interaction at the end.
He's clearly defeated by everything that's going on. Yeah, they have this exchange that I don't understand. Which may end up being something or not. We'll find out, obviously. But it goes, she's working on getting Randy a bottle, I think. Says, Roy? What? It's all over. What is? You know what. Do you want to? Tonight? Sure, he said. Sure. And thought again, isn't this some life? Isn't this just some life? What does that mean? I don't know what any of that means.
When she says, "Do you want to tonight?" I was like, "Is she asking to do it? Like bang? Like is
that was sort of my first inclination as well, because they're in this disenchanted relationship, and the depiction of that in media is always well, do you want to have sex tonight? Yeah, sure, whatever, that sort of thing. But when she says it's all over, what is?
Yeah, what's over?
What's over. Do you want to tonight? It seems like those statements are more connected in the way that she said it, at least in the way that I sort of tried to read into it when I was trying to figure out what the hell they were talking about. And then my next theory about what that means is are they both now just outwardly recognizing to each other that they've been totally defeated by the life that they've given themselves? Are they going to suicide pact right now? What's going on? I don't understand what's happening.
Suicide pact. Do you want to tonight?
That's what it seems like. Because she says it's all over. Life is over. Look at where we are. Neither of us can care at this point. do you want to, you know, yeah, okay. So I don't know. We'll find out. If the next section opens up with the police at their trailer, then we'll know. So anyways, we cut away to, we're back at the municipal building. Parkins and his deputy's name, I can't remember, the one who's a little gung-ho about justice that I'm a little annoyed by. The agent
Nolly?
Nolly
Gardner?
Nolly Gardner, exactly. The agent from the Portland FBI branch calls Parkins back with what he gathered. Parkins gets the info on Ben's dead wife, Miranda, and the several peace marches he's been in. He's pretty clean. Kurt Barlow, born Kurt Brachen in Germany, fled to England in 1938, where he became naturalized. Any record before that is just not available. Has been in the import-export business in London since 1945. Straker has been Barlow's partner since then, is the one that deals with the public. British by birth, 58 years old, is what we were talking about earlier.
There we go, yeah, okay.
Father was a cabinet maker in Manchester, left a fair amount of money. Barlow and Straker applied for extended stay visas to the U.S. 18 months ago. There doesn't appear to be any connection between Ben and the other two.
Good to know.
So what this tells us more or less is that what Straker had said about them having worked together in England and Hamburg before checks out. It's not untrue. So we know that Kurt, the first full record that we have is that he fled Germany to England in 1938, which is obviously at the start of World War II. We have no idea when he was born. The FBI agent suspects that he's in his 70s.
Yeah.
You know, given whatever they do have.
Right at the end, right after the phone call, Nolly asks, who was that? And then he lies and he's like, the Excellent Cafe. They ain't got any ham on rye. Like,
yeah, Parkins really doesn't.
He doesn't like his partner.
Yeah, and I don't think that he doesn't like his partner. He's like, because he says in the beginning, Nolly was a good kid. He's just a little gung-ho and stuff like that.
That's literally what I was going to say.
And I think that Parkins, being a more veteran constable, knows that he can't be giving all this information to Nolly just yet, given Nolly's tendencies.
I see.
Because it's like, I need to find out everything that I can, and if any of it matters, then we can move together forward. We move forward together on it. If I start telling him stuff that may not matter now, he's going to ruin everything. You know, he's going to march up to the Marston house and start questioning them before I need to play this correctly so I can get as much out of it as possible.
He's been doing it super smooth and cool too, as far as we've read.
Yeah, right. So then we jump to Dud Rogers, who is the dump custodian. He's burning garbage and shooting rats.
His favorite pastime.
While he's doing this, he ends up, a stranger shows up in the dump. Dud goes over there to be like, hey, the dump closed at 6. I'm going to need you to leave. But the stranger is pretty agreeable and sort of charms charms Dud a bit into continuing the conversation. It's a pleasant conversation.
Yeah, charming enough. You know, he's nice.
Yeah. Dud starts to suspect that it's Barlow.
Yeah.
Because he knows that it being a stranger in town, who can it be but one of the two? And he is familiar with who Straker is, evidently. Because he internally thinks, this must be the other guy. This will be something that I can, kind of wave in the shopkeeper's face when I go back down to buy more
I
stuff.
met the new guy. He said, I'm a recent resident of your lovely town.
But then that's what gives it away.
But then when he asks, he's like, so say you ain't the fella who bought the Marston place, are you? He changes the topic and he goes, predators, the man said. And then he talks about like rats, how he loves rats. And
There was also a big rat that Dud shoots but misses, and then the rat sits up on his haunches and sort of looks at him.
What?
And Dud's like,
I forgot about that rat.
Aren't they bold? And then shoots him. And then whenever he goes over to him, he's still not dead. He has to crush his skull. Ugh. But it's another rat that does the same thing that the one in the house did. And then it's at that time that the stranger shows up. So,
the Rat King.
Right? Yeah. So then, during the conversation, Dud realizes that he's sort of in a bit of a trance, that he's kind of, he's feeling like really good. He's totally into the conversation.
Yeah.
The stranger, who we assume is Barlow, just start calling him Barlow. Barlow is sort of asking him about him. Does your hump give you trouble? Because he's got a hunchback. Do people give you trouble for the hunch?
Yeah, and he's
things like that. Sort of like feeding into like Dud's desires to sort of get in with him some more. It comes out that Dud, while he hates Ruthie Crockett, desires her as well.
Oh yeah.
And so then Barlow is like, "Oh, I guarantee you'll have her." And then at this time, Dud is like in the full like full trance or whatever, the full enchantment that's being put on him, and he like sort of starts fantasizing about Ruthie, like showing off her cleavage to him. And she says something like, touch them, bite them, suck them, or something like that.
Yeah, kiss them, Dud, bite them, suck
then,
them.
Yeah. And then Barlow gets closer to Dud, and Dud, it says something like, Dud understands what is going to happen, but doesn't even care when the pain comes. It almost feels pleasant or something like that.
Yeah, Dud understood everything and welcomed it. And when the pain came, it was as sweet as silver, as green as still water at dark fathoms.
Yeah, it's like the enchantment, part of the enchantment was maybe like almost a bestowment of knowledge of what, was happening, what was going to happen. But because he was enchanted, that was like, yeah, okay, cool.
I like that it was a man attacking a man too. It wasn't like he glamored some girl. I don't know why I like that better, but I feel like it kind of shows the true extent of his power rather than just being like maybe a predator. Like if he was just like a sexy old man, he could lure somebody. But like, it shows him being like, I am a predator and I can get guys. I can get anybody. Like I can glamour you and get people to do what I need to do. Cause them pain when pain came. Who knows what that is?
So then we move on to Father Donald Callahan, who is drinking in his study.
He's good and drunk.
Spills a little bit of his whiskey, so then he goes to get the cleaning solution because he doesn't want I guess it's his secretary or whoever it is that does the books at the church, basically. Doesn't want her to see the stain because even though she is probably fully aware that he drinks, he doesn't want to deal with the shame of it.
Yeah, it makes it sound like she's kind of rolled her eyes at him before, like she's busted him doing it before.
Right.
But
he spends this time thinking back on his schooling, in the seminary and in his life after having, making it to the lot and, in his parish there. He thinks about a lot of different things in regards to that, sort of hates. I don't know that he necessarily hates being the priest of this, particular parish, or if he just sort of begrudges the fact that he doesn't have too much of a mission here. I think he feels like he says something to that effect as well.
Yeah, I think he was also he was going to be a writer. He wanted to write a book about the history of the church, and then he couldn't. Well, it's not that he couldn't. His drinking problem started right around when he wanted to start writing this book, and then they coincided, and they never worked out. So like
there's also a brief fantasy of him like moving to LA and becoming an actor or something like that. But then more seriously, he starts to think about how the generation of priests before him had a mission, which was like, a lot of them started championing rights and things like that. So that was their like mission as a generation of priests. And now there's nothing really for him to champion. So, and he realizes that he wants to fight some great evil. And that's how the chapter ends.
Yeah.
Which he's, if the book keeps going in the direction it's going to, he's going to have some great evil to challenge.
Yeah.
Chapter 7, Matt. Ben arrives at the school for the guest lecture in Matt Bark's class. And then, after that, Ben arrives at Matt's house for dinner.
Yeah, the lecture seemed to go pretty well. The kids liked him, I assume.
Yeah.
Because he got invited to go have dinner. Oh, and we kind of learned that Matt's pretty chill. Just like the way they talk just right off the bat. He's like, we don't really have a drug problem. He's like, not even pot? And he's like, nah, the administration doesn't consider that an issue. It's like, okay.
It's drinking, that's the real thing.
And the drinking age just got lowered to 18, too. So it's like, well, duh, these kids are going to be drinking.
Yeah, right. So they eat. Matt had made spaghetti, which is evidently pretty good spaghetti because Ben is like about it.
Oh, yeah, he wants seconds.
Then Matt asks Ben about the book again. Ben seems to trust Matt pretty well at this point. It gives him some insight into his idea. Matt has an idea that Ben is basing things on the disappearances of the 30s in the township. And says that a lot of people have probably already made the same connection Ben has between the house being occupied and the disappearances happening. So these were the disappearances that Ben was talking about with Susan, about during the 11 years that the Marsons were there, 4 boys disappeared and were never found. Matt asks Ben what he thinks about Straker. Ben says he knows nothing and isn't sure he wants to know anything, afraid it might throw off his book to find out that Straker is a perfectly ordinary salesman.
It's nicer to just think he's a
right. He's already got this image of the Marston house, which the book is totally dependent upon. And if he finds out that everything's chill and normal, then it's just going to totally ruin like his mindset. But they plan to go with Susan to the Marston house and introduce themselves on behalf of the town.
I think at one point it says that, they start talking about Danny Glick.
They do talk about it briefly, that Matt mentions how he had gone to the doctor to do something, and his doctor had consulted with Danny's doctor. And so they had gone over what happened. Matt is at this point already sort of having some sort of theory of what's going on based upon Danny's chart. And he brings up to Matt, or to Ben, that there was a peculiar thing in the chart where Danny had a substantially low hemoglobin count.
The red blood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's all that really gets brought up between the two of them about Danny right there, I believe.
They keep bringing up that red blood cell count.
Yeah. So when we cut ahead to a couple of days ahead at this point, but Matt is going to Dell's to get some drink.
Yeah, it's on a Thursday actually. So like I think they have dinner. Well, so on Tuesday he goes over to meet with the class, and I assume he goes that night for dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're right. A couple of days pass, and it says
because there's no play practice on Thursday.
Exactly, that's what it says. So it's just a couple days.
Yeah. And Matt can't get any medicine for his insomnia from his doctor, so he's going to go to the bar and get his own medicine.
There you go.
Gets to the bar, sees some people there. It's a Thursday night, so it's slow. It's not like a Friday or Saturday night.
College night, dude.
There's no music. There's no live music. Weasel's there talking to a couple of people. He sees Floyd Tibbetts there, who is evidently pretty upset, and then we get a small aside where apparently Floyd has talked to Susan a couple of times, and none of the talks went well.
Yeah, I
so
think
Susan's becoming pretty dedicated to Ben, and it's like, we're over it, Floyd. But he also sees Mike Ryerson there, decides, that's who I'm going to go talk to. Mike was a previous student of his.
And he was not looking good.
Yeah, he looks like trash.
Yeah, he looked awful. Like, his first assumption was just drugs,
he's on something.
Heavy drugs.
Yeah. So he goes over there, notices that whenever Fritz gets up to him, he's like, man, you're fucked up, what's going on? He asks him about, what's up. Mike says, I'm not on anything. I haven't ever been on anything. It's been 4 months since I even smoked weed. I'm sick. I must be what it is. And then we go into the story about how he thinks he's been sick since the burial, since Danny Glick's funeral. He fell asleep at the cemetery that night, evidently after filling the grave. He doesn't even remember doing it, but when he woke up, the grave was filled and patted down even. Matt asks, what do you remember, Mike? I remember singing, he said, the sweetest singing I ever heard, and a feeling like drowning, only it was nice. Except for the eyes. The eyes. They were red. Oh, scary eyes.
We were talking about it earlier, and it's probably not Danny, or it's not, Danny was the kid, right? Yeah, so it's probably not Danny's eyes. It's
because I don't think that they described him as being red. I don't remember.
No, they were just open, I think.
Yeah, they were just open, and it was normal or whatever. It wasn't made a point of being red. But even before that, I think that Mike, in his hallucination of being watched, might have been describing them in his head as being red or whatever, which he was obviously being put under some sort of enchantment because of the chunks of time that he was losing and the hysteria that he goes into and all that sort of thing. So maybe he was actually seeing the eyes, even if it was only in his mind. Mm-hmm. But then he goes on to describe the rest of his week, how he's been sleeping all day, waking up feeling maybe a little bit better here, but then like trash. He can't eat.
Yeah.
He can't get anything done.
He just, like the first day, he was up a little bit, and then he walked and he wandered into the woods because he was going to go read, and then he got too tired, so he just passed out. And then, like you said, he slept all day, only up at night, can't eat, can't drink.
Matt asks Mike to come stay at his house for the night, and then he'll take him to the doctor in the morning.
Yeah.
Mike agrees. So then we cut to them at the house. Matt checks in on Mike as he's getting ready for bed, sees that there are marks on Mike's throat.
What?
Asks him where he got those. Mike doesn't know. Matt implores with him to let him know if he needs anything throughout the night, and then he goes to bed. Matt doesn't sleep. He is sort of going through everything. He thinks about Danny Glick's case that he had gone over with his doctor. In the case notes that he had seen, Danny also had puncture marks on his throat. So at this point, he's totally paranoid. He's totally thinking about what it is that he's thinking about.
And he considers calling Ben, because they hit it off, and they both have similar theories that something...
Matt's already in the mindset of the Marston house is fucking stuff up. Ben thinks this too. I should call him, but he doesn't because it's so late.
Yeah, and Ben's staying at the house with all these, like that,
he's at the boarding house, and there's a bunch of people staying there, and... So I think he says something like, nobody calls that late to the boarding house unless somebody's dead.
Yeah, he's not going to cause a commotion.
And he's slowly building up the paranoia. He's like freaking himself out, even though he's like, it can't be possible. It can't be possible. What I'm thinking is madness.
Yeah, what you're thinking is madness.
But then as he's stood up and looking up at the Marston house through his window, he hears Mike. Softly, yet clearly in the silent house, the words came. Spoken in Mike Ryerson's voice. Spoken in the dead accents of sleep. Yes, come in. Matt is paralyzed with fear. He knows what this is. then
you gotta get invited in. I think I know what it is.
The sound of a window opening can be heard, and then the high, sweet, evil laugh of a child, and then the sucking sounds.
Yeah, that's
motherfucking vampires,
dude. And
we got vampires in this book.
Not just vampires, child vampires. Those are the fucking creepiest, dude.
I know.
Child vampire, immortal, fucking blood sucking children. Ugh.
So at this point, we know it's vampires.
Oh, it's got
Matt knows it's vampires. That's the thing that he's been thinking and going like, that's madness. That can't be true. Blah blah blah. But he's already sort of on a subconscious same page with Ben about some evil coming from the Marston house. Well, and now it's just like even more supernatural. It's not just that it's an evil man and an evil presence. It's a fucking vampire.
Yeah, and him being an English teacher, he was like, it can't be. Like, I've read books about this. It's just pretending. And it's like, no, that's the only thing it could be.
We also are left to assume that Danny's a vampire.
Yes, we are left to assume that. I forgot.
Potentially Ralphie. It could be either of the two of them.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It could be...
Ralphie is...
shit, yeah.
We assume that Ralphie was the one that was... whose body was offered during the incantation. So what? But we don't know what that means. Was it offered to be taken into the coven?
Yeah. Or
was it offered and consumed as a part of whatever ritual was being done?
Yeah.
If so, then this isn't Ralphie. But Danny's corpse is already laid out. He was, with him having the low hemoglobin and the low blood count and all that sort of stuff, which we can assume that Mike had as well because of his general complexion and the way that he looked and everything.
He was pale.
Mike, and now with Mike being fed on as well, which I guess is also part of something that we'll find out when we find the more strict rules of this mythology of vampire. Are these people being held on as cattle, or are they being turned?
Yeah, that's a great question because it feels like Mike's cattle, but...
Yeah, it feels like Mike's cattle, but some kid has been turned, whether it's Ralphie or Danny.
The more we speculate, I think it's probably Danny because I feel like Ralphie was the sacrifice and then Danny was the one with the creepy eyes open. Otherwise, why else would he have gone to the grave? Because he could have fed on anybody that night. He went, and then he picks the grave digger who's not, the most popular, but everybody knows him in town, everybody knew the other person too, but...
Like, he was going to go there to get Danny's corpse anyways.
Yeah.
It just so happened that Mike was still there. And so he's like, oh, well, 2 for 1.
Well, yeah, because he picks off Dud Rogers, who's like a nobody in town. Nobody likes him, really. Well,
but
they might like him.
He tells Dud that he will get what he wants with Ruthie. So maybe he turns Dud as well.
Oh, cool.
It seems like their whole mission, at least this is my theory so far, the mission of them coming to Salem's Lot was 1, maybe they got run out of London. 2, now that the 2 of them are there, they need to build up a coven for whatever their grand mission is, whatever that ends up being. Maybe we get that later on. But at the very least, they've got to build up a coven. They don't want to just have the 2 of them. So they've got some kid at this point. Ultimately, they might end up having Mike as well if he doesn't just die. Well, I guess, they had Danny and then Danny died, and now we're assuming he's the kid vampire. Yeah. So, maybe that's part of the process.
Yeah, I feel like that's always part of the ritual. You have to fully get drained, and then you got to go underground for a little bit, and then you got to get brought back up. I don't know why I think that's part of the... I know that's not how it is in Twilight. I know that's not how it is.
It depends on the mythos. There's general vampire lore that has rules that permeate different versions of it, but every author or director or whatever takes some of that and makes it their own for whatever purposes fit their narrative.
It does seem like in every vampire mythology that the person who turns somebody else, it seems like the person that has been turned is almost owes loyalty to...
Oh yeah, that is like an absolute 100% through line, it seems like. Except maybe not in the Underworld series. The movies with Kate Beckinsale.
It seems like they were all just born vampires, right?
The ones that were...
No, the other one guy was born half. Sorry, go on.
The ones that were given in those movies are all ancient already.
Oh, yeah.
And the vampires in that franchise have they have a system that is just meant to keep them alive and under the radar. They've got the business that makes blood so that they don't have to hunt humans anymore.
That was awesome.
They've got a rotating leadership system where the 3 super ancients, the original 3 vampires, take turns ruling and telling the covens to do a couple of different things, however they think it is. But they're very much in maintain mode in that. they're not recruiting.
We've seen Straker in the day, right? So
yes.
I wonder what he is. Because he seems to have supernatural abilities, like, well, maybe not supernatural, but he seems obviously super strong, super confident, super sturdy. And he seems to be ancient, like older than we give him credit for because of the money.
We have a birth date on Straker.
Yeah, I mean, he's 58, 56 or whatever. Like,
we don't know what Barlow's deal is.
Yeah, I
think that
it just seems like he's got something special going on though too. Like I don't know I don't know if he's completely human or not. Maybe
I would assume he's not, given I mean the strength alone and then his general countenance.
Maybe he's just like taking a little of the vampire blood. Like that's always like a big thing in certain genres of this like stories that like the blood from a vampire given back to a human in small doses can have like almost like a healing effect or like a strengthening effect. So maybe that has a little something. It'll be interesting to see, as you said, how
what rules it is that Stephen King's got going on here. You know, what he takes from the general mythology, what he maybe adds as well. Maybe there's new rules fit for this narrative specifically.
I like to think that he would do that he wouldn't just go off of somebody else's rules. That he'd
you've got to, unless you're just like literally writing a sort of Bible-esque compendium of of like lore, you've got to make something new or only take a few things from it because your narrative is going to have restrictions on what works in that.
Right.
Like in the example of the Twilight books, they're sparkly in the daylight. Because if they burned up in the daylight, that'd be pretty inconvenient for her narrative, you know?
Yeah, these kids are going to school.
So it does, so it can't work in the story that she wants to tell, so they don't burn. They turn into diamond or whatever, you know?
They glimmer and it's obvious.
Yeah, so you've got to, so depending on what your story does, you have to change certain things. So I imagine that he'll be doing some of that to some effect. Some of these rules will be left out. Maybe he's got new ones. It's always interesting to see how that goes.
Yeah.
But we've got motherfucking vampires.
Yeah, we got vampires.
One of my favorite things to this day is vampires.
What's your favorite vampire? My favorite is different than the one that I would want to be. Like if you had to turn me into a vampire.
And everybody's is. Everybody, and pretty much everybody that I have ever had this conversation with says the same thing, which we'll say. But I think that, man, I really don't know. I really like the Underworld series, Vampire Universe. I like the mythos and the legend. The movies end up being really bad. But the first one introduced this really cool universe, in my opinion. I liked everything that was happening there, and then everything got off the rails. But the mythos there is great, I think.
Yeah.
And they're also really cool. Like cool, neo-goth vampires. They're listening to like heavy industrial music in the house. They're all like the best versions, the most like romantic versions of vampires where they're all like just fucking hot and sexy. They're all fucking getting it all the time. Super awesome. They are obviously very successful in their business of having, they own like a couple of medical businesses or something like that. And then they're at this constant war with the lycanthropes, you know, having like gun fights in the subways and stuff like that. It's like super badass. So that's like sort of like that idea of the vampire is something that I really like. Although the vampires in Harry Potter are really cool too. We only see a couple of them.
I don't even remember vampires in Harry Potter.
We only see a couple of them. It's something that really happens. But they seem to be, I don't know that they're, because we want to see a couple and they don't go into it, we don't know what the rules of it are. I don't know that they're people that turn into vampires or if vampires are their own thing, which is also something that happens sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
But the glimpse that you get at them in the Harry Potter universe at least intrigued me and I wanted to know more. But the vampire that I want to be is Twilight Vampire.
Oh, for sure.
Because
there's
no consequences to anything.
Oh, no, they get...
It's great. You get all the benefits and none of the consequences.
And you might even get a superpower. Half the time,
they've all got like, they all get like a quirk.
Yeah. Dude, I think... Some of my favorite vampires are like True Blood. The whole series wasn't super interesting because like by like season 3 they were like werewolves and shit, and I was like this isn't what I signed up for. I just wanted a bunch of fucking vampire drama, and then it brings in all these other things like Sookie's a fucking fairy. But anyway, so how do you want to do this for next week? How far do you want to get?
Oh man, well. For this next section of reading, what we're going to do is we're in part 2 now, so this is, you know, where the big build-up starts happening. Now that we've got the reveal of the vampires, we're going to get obviously things are being set in motion at this point, but what we're going to do is we're going to get about halfway-ish through part 2. We're going to end at chapter 11, so read 7, 8, 9, and 10.
Yeah, so starting at the Emperor of Ice Cream and then stop at Ben 4.
Well, the Emperor of Ice Cream is the name of the part.
Right. But it's I just wanted to say it.
Yeah. Part 2, the Emperor of Ice Cream.
Yeah.
8 is titled Bin 3.
So bin 3, and don't read bin 4.
Yeah.
So just bin to bin, but don't read the second one.
Mm-hmm. So follow us on Twitter. Talk to us on Twitter. Follow us on Instagram. Talk to us on Instagram. It's all at ears_stamps. Our email address is dogears and timestamps all spelled out
at
gmail.com.
gmail.com. Let us know what vampire y'all would want to be. Obviously, everybody wants to be Twilight, so you can't pick Twilight. Pick a different one.
Yeah, that's easy.
Yeah, pick a hard one, in the mythos, and, maybe it's this one. Maybe you want to be the Salem's Lot vampire. They sound pretty strong.
Right.
So, I mean...
So far, they seem like they've got it going on.
Yeah, but please leave us reviews. Let us know what you think of the show. Anyway.
Yeah, just get in contact with us and tell people as well if you're enjoying it. Let everybody that you think might enjoy it. The more listeners we have, the more conversation that can happen as well.
Yeah.
So get the word out. Take to the streets.
Take it to the streets. And the cool thing about this is you can take it at whatever pace you want, or you don't even have to read the book.
Yeah, you don't even have to really be with us every week. You can, just let it lapse and then knock everything out in a single week.
I love you guys. Our fan.
All right. I'm Will Hedrick.
I'm Jordan Shepard.
This is Doggers and Timestamps. Bears are up 11 points.